So essentially exactly the same materials that I was using before, but in just slightly different form. And just playing around with these sloping roofs and walls. And by this time, Robert Venturi and Charles Moore were telling us that it was okay to use wrought iron gates and things. And this project is a completely different thing, and unfortunately I don't have an area plan, but this is in the Century City area. That's the old back lot of the 20th Century Fox studio. It's 13 acres. The vertical street is Olympic Boulevard, and the horizontal street at the bottom is Century Park West. The bridge exists. It connects the existing big main studio over on this side that runs over to Pico. Up that way is the Century Plaza Hotel, 20-some stories, the two big, huge Yamasaki triangular buildings, and down over here is R1, one-story housing. So this project became a transition from the high-rise down to the one-story. It was a competition, a paid competition, and we did not win. The program called for townhouses, as many as you could put on the site of a certain size, and it was won by a firm called Fisher Friedman in San Francisco that did the kind of thing that they do. We tried to do. Now, I'm sorry if that sound. I didn't mean it to sound that way. Really, we did one thing and they did something else. What we did was to break it down into 6 villages, 6 little mini villages, and cluster units in a kind of a habitat fashion over them, and throw in some forms that were sort of slightly reminiscent of the Garden of Allah type of thing, and and tried to have a little bit of fun with it that way. I really don't consider this to be a totally satisfactory kind of a project, but I wanted to show you that I had been involved with something of this scale. These are 2 different densities. We started out just with these sugar cube modules, I think 230 units and 180, just to see what it would look like on the site. And then I went through like this very, very vast kind of analysis of townhouses, because I'd never really designed a townhouse of this type before, and I had to sort of go back and start from scratch and see if I could see what I would come up with. And what I came up with was that you really could design a townhouse that was essentially a cube, and a cube seemed like a fairly logical kind of a unit to start with. And here's one sitting on the ground, and in 3-story form. On the ground floor you would come in and there would be bedrooms, as a la a typical New York townhouse. Then you would go up a flight and you would get to the bedroom, to the living room and dining area, and then you'd go up another flight and you'd be at either a bedroom or a study looking out over the living room below, or that could be a roof terrace. I don't think I included that plan, but you could walk from that 3rd story outside, obviously, and then they could just be put one on top of the other and kind of clustered up in that fashion, and the whole thing built with concrete block with construction methods that were really being used for 12-story apartment buildings in Orange County and being built for relatively economical sums of money. And again, these are just a couple of shots coming in on one of the mini villages, and then a quick sketch of what it might sort of look like. I showed this, the reason that I'm a little bit touchy on this project is that I showed it to Tom Main's class, and they jumped all over it so badly that I really didn't know whether I should bring it back or not. Another project, this is in Pasadena. This is the Westridge Girls School, and I did a master plan for them, And in the master plan, I suggested that they buy an adjacent green and greenhouse and that they transform it into their fine arts building by moving the existing fine arts buildings from the center of the campus out to the area where the house is shown. I don't know if you can see it, and I can't move away from this thing very well, but it is in the lower portion of the plan to the right of the parking area. Can you see that there? I think that's it. Yeah, and this is the house on opening day. We did this project over 2 summers. The first summer we went in and put in a new heating system and new electrical, new plumbing as was needed, a sprinkler system and that kind of thing. We spent $40,000, and we came back not the next summer but the following summer, I guess it was, and finished up all the interiors, putting in a dark room and studios and that kind of thing. And the parameters that I set up were that the exterior of the house would be maintained exactly as it was originally designed by Charles and Henry Green, and on the inside we would maintain the living room, the entry hall, and the dining area exactly as it was originally, and the rest of the house we would take total liberties with. And essentially the house itself is shown here in the lower part of this plan, and the old art center that we were picking up and moving from one part of the campus to the other is shown there, creating a courtyard, and that part to be moved over is the sculpture section, and this part becomes painting and darkroom and the rest of it. And that shot there is on the back porch labeled A in the upper left. That's the old service porch, now being used by the smallest children as their art studio. And we brought in industrial shelving, as you can see, for flexibility. An extremely satisfying project to do that rehabilitation job. I felt that that I had really learned a lot, and that it had proven to be a very economical solution for the school, because for about $80,000 they got the equivalent of, I would guess, about a $250,000 to $300,000 facility. This is a chair prototype that I designed in conjunction with Jack Brogan, just to show you another facet of the kind of thing that I've been working on. That's the parameters here were to use Douglas fir 4x4s that I'd been using in construction and just make furniture out of it, and designed a very simple aluminum connection, which consists of a dowel, an aluminum dowel going through take this right here. That's an aluminum dowel that you see going through, and another one coming from the top of the same diameter, but after it gets past about an inch, it changes diameter to 1/4 of an inch and is threaded. So it threads right into the other one, and you simply tighten up on it. So all of those joints are dry joints, and the whole chair can be taken apart very simply by just using 1/4 in the slots. This is a little bank in Redondo Beach, which was a low-cost job. And this is a dormitory at a boys' school in Claremont, where I first started using the steel sash and got into a tile roof in this area because it was conforming with other buildings on the campus, but went to a rather Spartan kind of a use of concrete block. Unfortunately, I don't think I have a plan here, but it's 10 rooms at this end, 10 rooms at that end, a faculty house down here and a faculty house up there. The 10 rooms are divided into 2 floors so that there's 5 on each floor. And they have a roofed over but open to the elements common kind of living area between them, which the students can either furnish or not furnish as they desire. Should 5 congenial people get together, they could get an old sofa and table and fix it up, but it wasn't made a strict part of the program, and the furniture was not provided. And then moving on to another project, this is a house in Westwood that was done in about I'm sorry, that slide is backwards. That should be reversed. Very sorry. This was done for Henry Mudd in about 1968. This was my first real use of concrete, and here we decided to sandblast it, and we packed the form tie holes with black grout a la Salk Institute, and then combined it with cedar siding and brick. The brick was an especially nice product. It was about 6 inches square and about 3.5 inches thick. And we used two different hues, one lighter and one darker. The lighter around the pool so it wouldn't be so hot on your bare feet, which really proved to be quite true. Tommy Church, the landscape architect, told me about that, and he was really right. In the kitchen and the living area from the terrace. And from terrace going down to swimming pool and then the main entry of the house. I'm not really taking you through this house because I don't want to take too much time, but it is essentially a situation where the living areas are all on one side, separated by that courtyard and a glass galleria from the bedrooms and so on, which are over on the swimming pool side. And then jumping to yet another project. This is a canyon in Arizona, about 10 miles outside of Sedona. It's a homesteaded site of about 65 acres that is completely surrounded by forest land, thousands of acres of it, and has these fantastic Indian burial caves on the side walls, and is, in other words, a very fantastic place. The subsequent house that I designed can be seen in that shot in the very center of the white dot. And the design process here was a rather interesting one for me. It was, I felt that there were two choices. You could either, well, there were three: do nothing at all, which might have been, possibly the best. But given the fact that somebody was going to build here, I felt that there was the choice of either doing something like a very pristine glass, crystalline kind of a box that would reflect this environment, or doing something that would really fit into it. And we looked around and we found a brick that was similar to the brick that I'd used in Mazatlan, only it was made in San Luis, across the border from Yuma, which wasn't too far away, and it picked up a lot of the colors that these red sandstone cliffs had. So I started with that as a material, and then just trying to be as simple as possible in terms of orienting rooms and spaces to very particular and precise views again, and keeping it all as simple and kind of sculptural as I could. I related it in my mind to certain Indian projects in the area, and I happen to have these photographs, so I put them in, but there are other projects which were plateau-type projects that the local Indians did that were more applicable. This happens to be a cliff dwelling, but I think I get the idea across with these shots. And here we are starting to lay the thing out on that site. And here's a sample wall that we built of the brick to see whether in fact it really would fit in with the sandstone cliffs. And you can see all the fabulous colors that were in that brick, including a kind of a sulfurous yellow, which was almost unbelievable. I'd never seen anything like it before. And then the house, I guess that's one of the views. That's looking up the canyon, and that's one of the views from the living room. And this is a portion of the house under construction. The color is not as good as it finally turns out to be because there's still a lot of mortar on those walls. They had to be washed down and cleaned up. But the construction process here was we simply built a double wall of brick with a 3-inch airspace in between. Then we filled that airspace with grout and steel, and then we poured concrete lintels across, and the wood work there is simply the formwork to hold those very simple concrete lintels, which simply rest on the brick walls. In order to design the house, I really had to take it out of the context of that magnificent site. So I made a series of drawings where it was just by itself and considered abstractly as a piece of sculpture. And then when we did the working drawings, we just put it back into the site, so to speak. But the plan is essentially a very simple one. You enter the house coming way around a sweeping driveway and underneath a bridge and into a motor court, and then into the house with the bedrooms over here and the garage and dining on that side, and then up to a second level and across, so that this is up a floor higher to a 2-unit guest room and bath back here at the back. So very simple, just rectilinear kind of a design, with each one of those spaces, windows looking out toward a particular view, and each wall that is a wall is never penetrated, and each opening is a complete opening. In other words, to use a much greater example, if you take the Dodge house and look at it, you will see that he was actually composing the windows on the walls that he was working with. In other words, that was a very conscious kind of thing that he was doing. If you look at the work of Gwathmey or Richard Meyer, most of the architects that I went to school with, that's essentially what they're doing. What I was trying to do here was simply deal with walls as walls and openings as openings, so that the compositional effect that you get, or the sculptural effect, is the total thing rather than any breakdown of any unit within that. And here's the house under construction. This house has been finished about 6 months, but I do not have any later photographs than these, but I think they pretty much give the idea. The concrete was given a light sandblast, which changed it and made it just a little bit lighter. We put a little bit of color into the concrete. There's an example of it. And the building on the left is the stables, which was treated like a Western storefront kind of thing, because behind that it's simply wood studs and concrete block. And the whole thing was built for $5,000, I think. This concludes the slide portion of the show, and now we have the film. And I'd just like to say that after the film, if there are any questions, I would be more than happy to answer them. But in the interests of those that might want to see the film and depart, let's have the film. But I would really enjoy getting into any questions that anybody might have.
Dirt has been a good building material for a long time. Clay, adobe brick. We could have used adobe if we'd made it thick enough. But we decided to use concrete.
Well, the whole job itself, whenever I first went on it, whenever I went up there and I seen those plans, I mean, the house is actually covered with dirt.
Some things did have to be worked out on the spur of the moment.
Actually, it is very flexible. It was up to you to decide how you were going to, it wasn't a normal house plan. Of course, normal houses aren't built out of concrete either.
That entire house is all solid concrete.
It's made out of cement, sand, and rock, and a certain portion of water.
We call it mud.
I know with concrete, when it comes out of the hose, it'll either dry fast or slow, but I don't think it's predictable. I think it's close, but I can't predict exactly how fast it's going to dry or how slow it's going to dry.
They seem to get excited with concrete. I don't know why it is.
In concrete, you don't have a second chance, you know. So if you miss it, it's missed.
But you cannot do with wood or steel that you're doing with concrete to build this house.
See, on the architectural plan, they'll show you each wall of what it's going to look like. And there's a pattern to it, you know. So, in your mind, you know what's happening.
The house is made of poured concrete with reinforcing steel, of course, inside there.
Rebar, that's a reinforcing steel that goes into just grade 40 steel.
The iron worker puts up an iron mat. He calls it a mat. You know, it's this interlocked steel mesh. I heard the architect says the whole concept of this was a modern concrete bridge technology incorporated into a house.
Exactly right. We use the same steel forms that they use in freeway construction.
up one side of the form, and then the steel people tie the steel. Then you come in and button up the other side of it. Use a snap tie. It has two little plastic separators there. See, and this separates the plywood. So this holds the plywood uniformly.
And they keep it from spreading out and breaking. You put 15 tons of concrete in about 10 minutes into a form, and that thing's gonna have to hold something, you know.
The way you're supposed to do it, you're supposed to pour it with as little water as possible, because that makes the concrete stronger.
However, you have to get enough water into it so that it'll get through that steel.
Places like this, sometimes rock collects, and then, you know, they run the vibrator down in there to agitate it.
When you put the vibrator in there, it actually settles it around everything that's in there.
After the concrete is placed, and if it's placed satisfactorily, or even, let's go a little further, whenever you strip it off. And there's no big rock pockets or anything in it. And so it's not too wavy. Then that's the time you say, gee, that's a good looking wall.
The spacing on your scaffolds is pretty important because, like when you pour a ceiling, well, you got all of that, the weight of the wet mud out there just on its own, and so you need pretty good support.
Good morning.
Then when the jacks are up, the carpenters come in. And then they put up the posts and then the forms for the ceiling.
Now, for instance, the big pours naturally were the floors and the roof. Well, Well, the upper roof, the square footage of that is huge, you know, for one concrete pour.
Your concrete will run roughly 155 pounds a cubic foot. Roughly, you figure 2 tons to the cubic yard. All your bracing has to be strong enough to hold all of that concrete. As I say, running 155 pounds a cubic foot, it doesn't take very much to get that pushing on it. You get tons pushing against that thing.
When that plywood was finally in place, you had the beginning of the roof.
If things go right, the minute the glass carpenter gets off that form, then the iron man has to come in and get his steel in. And as soon as that's in, we started laying pipe.
Cold wind doesn't help things either. Right now. Real hot this probably, huh? Oh,
Well, the wire is put right into the concrete in plastic conduit.
Okay. As long as we stay in the concrete, we use plastic pipe. We use the steel conduit when we penetrate a combustible wall.
All those lights in the ceiling had to go in right after the iron and while the iron was going in, because the concrete has been already ordered. It's coming tomorrow at 7:30. And so they want to start pouring concrete first thing in the morning because they pour all day in a day like that.